We have about a 30-minute turnaround for
Mhm.
building patients. In general, though, what we'll do is we'll work with a medical school or counseling school and say, what are your needs? And we'll build all the patients for them. And if they decide they need something new, they email us, we're able to get one to them pretty much immediately. Completely customizable. YC is worth every bit of hype that it gets, but not for the reasons people would expect. YC really does two things that are just extremely important to the early stage startups, and that's they keep you focused and they set your expectations correctly. I definitely see a lot more standardization of the evaluation systems that we use. So right now, you either got a multiple choice quiz or you've got the highly subjective OSCEs that you do,
Yeah.
right? And neither of them are really ideal.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we're diving into the space of medical education. It's a space that I haven't seen lots of people innovate in it, but this company is really changing the way that we approach medical education. When I first saw them, I was like, I wish they were there like 15 years ago when I was doing my medical school exam prep. Life would have been much easier. But anyways, I will let them talk about themselves. And today I have Tikran Bdoyan. Thank you so much for being here today, Tikran.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm really grateful you reached out and are having me on your show. Hopefully, I'll be able to reach many Armenians. And if there are any Armenians that are listening that want to reach out, please do. I always try to respond. So yeah.
That's amazing. By the way, Diko's and my last name end with IAN, and that's where the Armenian connection comes from. But
Mhm.
I'm not doing this because we're Armenian. I'm doing this because, like, really, SimCare AI, it's very inspiring. And if you guys can't believe me or don't believe me, don't go to their website. And if you're a medical student, you're going to see what I mean. But without further ado, Diko, can you tell me a bit about, or can you tell me the story behind SimCare AI? Like, what is the big problem that you guys solving?
Yeah. So we do AI patients for healthcare training and evaluation. And maybe to explain the problem, I'll sort of give you the rundown of how
Yeah.
we originally started. So I met my co-founder last year, and he was a pre-med student, and he
Hmm.
was taking the medical exams. He took something called the Casper exam, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's pretty widespread now,
Yeah, I'm very
but
familiar with it.
yeah, for people who don't know, it's a test that measures your clinical reasoning skills. So like
Hmm.
you see someone stealing lab results, lab supplies, what do you do? And of course he failed the exam because he was a very unethical person with bad clinical reasoning skills. And I made a little GPT wrapper for him. It was like a GPT wrapper. It did some sentimental analysis. You would talk to the screen, answer AI generated Casper exam questions, and we put it out there. We put it on some Reddit forums, some other like med school specific forums, and it just absolutely exploded in terms of traffic. We were seeing a lot more users than we were expecting, especially some people were using it for multiple weeks in a row, which surprised us because it's a test you just take once and you only really need to study for it once. And we were seeing people in, the Philippines and India that were using it for 8 weeks in a row. So we're like, okay,
Oh,
there's
wow.
something here that we don't understand that people are finding valuable. And that's when we sort of set out to like figure out what exactly had we landed on. And what we realized was that there was a huge bottleneck in scaling the non-didactic aspects of healthcare training across the world. So you can scale the information retrieval all day, but you can't scale the actual talking to the patient piece. And that's sort of the main bottleneck in healthcare training across the board, which we set out to find a scalable solution to.
I completely agree with you. But before giving my idea, my feedback on the product and why I love it so much, I'm still preparing for exams, by the way, after 16 years of training. I'm still preparing for exams. But can you simplify like what is SimCare AI? Like if I'm a new and I don't know anything about the company, like what is it? Like if I go to the website, what I'm gonna see?
Yeah, it's AI patients. So you can log on and in a completely voice-to-voice way, you can talk to a patient who's maybe they're dealing with some trauma, or maybe they've got some abdominal pain, or they've just come in for a routine visit, or maybe it's a mother and a son that have come in. The son is having some sort of issues, and you can talk to the patient just like you would in real life, and then get an evaluation afterwards.
Okay, so for people who are not in medical training, so but despite all this advanced technology and advancement in AI, so far medical training sucks. I will tell you why. The way we test our knowledge is we read a book, which is very, very dry, and this sometimes could be PDF, which is like the the advanced technology that we have in healthcare, and then we go and solve multiple choice questions. And for a regular exam, like you need to solve like around 2,000 to 4,000 MCQs to ace that exam, and that's what is expected. But these MCQs are very, very dry, and they don't really translate to how you treat patients
Hmm.
at the end of the day. Like in real life, you are talking to a patient. So
Right.
you are using your history collection skills, and then you're looking at the EMR, and then you're using your skills to pick the right data
Hmm.
points, to combine these right data points with the patient history to come up with a plan. But in real life, we're being tested with MCQs, which are very dull, very artificial, depends on keywords, and they don't really depend, or they don't really improve our history taking skills. And that's why when I saw SimCare AI, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And this can, like, for example, if I sit down, I can solve maybe an hour of MCQs and then I will get bored. But if
Hmm.
I talk to an AI and I do cases back to back, I can do this non-stop. I can do it
Right.
on treadmill. I can do it while like I'm walking or like doing something else. Like this is very cool. And I was expecting to see a product like this finally on the market, and here we are. SimCare AI. Everyone should check their website. And you guys went through YC, Y Combinator. Can you tell me a bit more about like how YC shaped your journey and how much value they gave you?
Yeah, sure. I can tell you the quick story of how we eventually got in. So my co-founder and I were both like very big YC fans. We followed them on the internet like for a large part of our lives, and we applied to Y Combinator for the batch we eventually got into, but we got rejected. And despite getting rejected, we still decided to move to San Francisco and spend our summer working on the startup instead of whatever else we had planned. And I had the idea of just making new emails and applying again, which is what we did. And we were hoping that they wouldn't be able to figure it out because it was sort of against the rules. And as soon as we got on the call, the person who was eventually be our group partner told us, I know this is your second time applying. Don't do it again, but this time it's okay. And eventually we got in, so that was really exciting. And just speaking to the experience itself, I think YC is worth every bit of hype that it gets, but not for the reasons people would expect. So it's not like they give you some sort of secret recipe or access to some extreme network that's just going to be a huge advantage. YC really does two things that are just extremely important to the early stage startups, and that's they keep you focused and they set your expectations correctly. So the focus piece is just like when you're working on a startup, when you first started, it's really difficult to know what to actually spend your time on. And a lot of people end up wasting a lot of their time. And YC is all about just like they teach you how to strip everything that isn't absolutely necessary for your survival out. For example, we had some advisors that we were talking to. We actually had a chief medical officer that turned out we didn't need, things like that. They teach you to strip all of that out, get right to the core of actually finding a problem and finding a solution to that. And the second thing is the expectations. We had no idea that the sales cycle for a medical school was going to be 1 to 2 years.
It's
We were
so
being really
long.
hard on ourselves, yeah, because we couldn't get any sales. And we were doing it for a month, and we were thinking, no one wants to buy this. There must be something wrong with us. But because we were actually able to talk to people who'd done it before, they're like, wait a minute, you're getting calls with all these big universities in just 1 month. That is already impressive. We were able to set our expectations and see like, okay, when are we actually doing good, and when do we know we are not onto something and we should pivot?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Sales in healthcare is like it's so slow. On
Hmm.
average, I've been in this space. On average, it takes like 8 months between like the first contact, doing the demo, meeting, especially if you're doing B2B, meeting with the people in charge, and then meeting with the
Hmm.
tech people in the hospital, and then like rolling out your product. Like on average, it's 8 months, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but it is very slow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even in health ed tech, which is sort of where we are, it can even go up to 1 to 2 years. So that's it was new information to us because we just didn't know.
Yeah. Can you tell me a bit more about the AI patients? Are these like AI patients with set like criteria, or like you set them, or like can I come to you like as a medical school, as a university, I tell you like I want those AI patients to teach or to react according to this scenario with my first years. I want them to react according to that scenario with my second year's medical students. Is that possible?
So we have about a 30-minute turnaround for
Hmm.
building patients. We don't allow for an instructor to go in and say, hey, I want this, and we generate it for you yet, though it
Hmm.
is on the product roadmap. In general, though, what we'll do is we'll work with a medical school or counseling school and say, what are your needs? And we'll build all the patients for them. And if they decide they need something new, they email us, we're able to get one to them pretty much immediately. Completely customizable.
What about the other side? Like, let's say if the people who are in charge, the supervisors of those students or residents, even because like this is a great product for even beyond training. I will touch base on that point in a second. But like, is there like a user interface for the people in charge to see how the medical students are doing and where are the deficiencies and how things are going with them?
Absolutely. And that sort of high level observability is where we're moving to now. Whether you're a instructor that's managing some classes in a med school or you're an owner of a telehealth company, we let you see what are the areas that my students slash my practitioners are spending too much time on? What are the areas they're not spending enough time on? What are the common mistakes that they make? Like specifically for counseling, we can tell you exactly what are the basic and advanced skills that your counselors are missing. So things like that. And here are some highlights of some compliance risks that occurred, things like that.
Gotcha. And it's not only medical students for our listeners, like it's not only medical students who need this type of training. It's like it's every physician, even physicians during their residency, which is the training that comes after medical school, fellowship, that is the training that comes after residency, and in real life. So physicians are required to do what we call CME, which is continuous medical education. And per year, physicians are required to do X amount of clinical cases or questions to answer to maintain their license, which 30 cases, to be honest with you, is it's like nothing. It should be more than that because like it doesn't really cover the breadth of healthcare or practicing medicine. And then there, every 10 years, physicians in the US are required to write their exams again. So education is a continuous thing. We don't stop learning as physicians. It's just like something you have to do
Yeah,
every single day. So this product is not only for medical students, it's every single healthcare provider, whether they are doctors or nurses or physician assistants. Like it's the list can go on and on.
absolutely. And we are actually being used in some really exciting ways in CME and residency. So residency specifically, we're being used in a lot of handoff training. So you get to residency school, but what they don't teach you about is like how do you sufficiently communicate the
Hmm.
information you need to the right person that's both you get the right info across, but you also do it in a way that's concise, right? Because that can be
Yes.
very important when you're actually on the floor. And then in CME, we're working really closely with some companies. We're actually CME certified to provide our
Oh
AI
wow.
patients as an alternative for the sort of button clicking that a lot of doctors are subjected to, where
Yeah,
you kind of just sit there and just say, yes, yes, yes. You just click on the screen.
I know.
So I think that's really exciting. And yeah, yeah,
Awesome. Um, Talking more about you and your experience through SimCare AI, I just want to touch base on you. So you guys went through YC, and I want to talk about the fundraising. Can you tell me a bit your approach to fundraising and attracting investors? Especially, you are in two different or difficult spaces: healthcare, which is difficult, and medical education, which is even harder to raise money in. So can you tell me like bit your approach? How would you sell your product? Or if I'm a listener, if I'm an entrepreneur, a listener to this episode, like how would you sell investors on your dream?
yeah, no, fundraising is definitely hard. I mean, we had the extreme fortune of going through YC, which definitely makes it a lot easier. I mean, something like 2% of YC companies have become unicorns historically. So if you're a VC and you're looking at that, those are pretty good odds. But we also had two of the most difficult industries, EdTech and healthcare, not the most kind mix at all.
No.
And when we first finished our batch, we weren't sure if we really had a VC backable idea because we were specifically building for medical schools. Our frame of reference was, hey, there are this many medical schools in the US. They spend this much on OSCEs. Even if we replace all of that, we don't know if the business is going to be big enough. And then we made the choice to shift our focus to counseling schools. And we started seeing so much usage and it went from, hey, let's have the conversation 6 months from now of whether or not we're going to even pilot this to, one meeting was turning into a pilot. And we ended up in just 3 weeks getting 30 counseling schools to start using us, which was just unheard of. That sort of adoption is just not something you find, especially in B2B, especially in EdTech. And then we started getting a lot of inbound from industry. And we realized actually our market is a lot bigger than the original medical school specific we were looking at. And this sort of adoption is an indicator of, hey, there's really something here. This isn't just a useful tool. This is really solving a big pain for people. And when we communicated that story to investors, I think that really resonated with a lot of them. And then also our longer term vision, which is, hey, we don't just want to be a replacement for your OSCEs or a replacement for some role playing you do. We want to be the standardized method of evaluating healthcare workers, especially when it comes to behavioral health and the sort of bedside manners that comes with being a healthcare provider.
Yeah, I think beyond that, a couple of points I want to touch on is the TAM. I don't think your TAM is limited to medical schools. I think it's bigger than that, and I don't think it's limited to the US. I will tell you why. Because like first, not medical school. Everyone needs to practice those cases. Nurses needs to practice those cases. Physiotherapists, physician assistants. Like today, I was working with a physician assistant, and they have to know like they have to know the patients and they have to suggest they are really good. They almost have the same education that we do but much shorter. So it's not only medical school and it's not only the US because like Canada and the US, so I did training in both countries and it's not different. Like medicine is the same. What's different
Mhm.
is the billing. One country is dependent on the government and the other country is dependent on insurance. So medicine is the same. It's not that different. Minor changes here and there. And then beyond the US and Canada, you have the world is, I would say, your oyster. Because, like, for example, India, South America, Europe, there are thousands and thousands of students that every year they travel to the US to match into residency and write residency exams, the USMLE step one, step two, step three, and all those things. And there aren't many big creative players right now. The main players, they have MCQs but no one have incorporated AI to create like simulated patients and to make education fun, which that's how it should be. So I think your TAM is much bigger than the US. I would go even, I would say like you have Canada for sure, Europe and India, IMGs, international medical graduates who travel to the US to write their exams.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what originally sort of excited us about what we were building with the Casper AI tool was this, there's definitely a need for this, especially for non-English speakers. And that's a lot of the excitement we're getting recently is there's this whole new trend in healthcare where people will start telehealth companies and hire practitioners from company or countries where the labor is cheaper,
Hmm.
right? So you hire people from Vietnam or India, and you'll have them do a lot of sort of taking in info, doing histories, and then you'll have somebody else sort of processing all that info. And what we found is as the healthcare moves towards that model, they need to spend a lot more time evaluating if the people they're hiring actually know how to talk to patients
Hmm.
and upskilling slash onboarding them when they do bring them on. And that's a really exciting use case where we've seen a lot of excitement by providers.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Since you talked about like hospitals and how they are trying to hire people from outside or like Casper or like where do you see the trend right now in healthcare? Where do you see AI in medical education? What are the biggest trends from your experience so far?
Yeah, so there's sort of two things going on in parallel. The first one is the pure automation is definitely happening, and that's definitely going to take effect to some extent. And what I mean isn't AI doctors. What I mean is maybe a nurse is taking what you're saying and inputting it somewhere, and then a doctor somewhere else is sort of looking over it and running it through an algorithm and just saying, yes, it looks good, and that's your diagnosis. That's something we're seeing a lot. But what we're also seeing is practitioners that are sort of being made superhuman using AI, right? So you're able to take on a lot more patients, you're able to take on a lot more histories, you're able to do it in a much lower risk environment because of these AI scribes or tools like us that are evaluating, telling you where the risks are, helping you just simply be more efficient, integrating with your EMRs, things like that. That are just, they're democratizing a practitioner's ability to talk to more patients.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Talking to let's say if you go like 10 years forward, how would you see AI from 10 years from now, how would you see AI being used in medical education? And I think it's just going to be mind-blowing, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts. Like in 10 years from now, like, do you think we're going to have holograms or like where things are going to be?
I definitely see a lot more standardization of the evaluation systems that we use. So right now, you either got a multiple choice quiz or you've got the highly subjective OSCEs that you do,
Yeah.
right? And neither of them are really ideal because healthcare A is moving more and more towards a service sort of profession because more and more of what a provider does is being automated. And on the other hand, we just don't have a good way of seeing if someone is good at talking to patients. I mean, you have the stereotype of the doctor or the surgeon who's just really difficult to deal with, very neurotic. But that a lot of that has to do with our inability to evaluate and have feedback loops for people's bedside manners or actual service skills. And I think what AI is going to do is really standardize that for us. So we can have simply a better evaluation framework for across all of healthcare.
Yeah, I agree with you. For listeners who don't know what OSCE is like objective structured clinical exam. In simple way, you go and you talk to a standardized, not real patient, fake patient in simple terms. And whether you are in Canada or in the US, depending on the country, in Canada, you will have an examiner with you sitting in the room, so you will see them. In the US, when you talk to this standardized or simulated patient, the examiner is going to be behind the glass, so you will not see them. So you're being evaluated by someone, and there is lots of subject. I would say there is good amount of subjectivity in it. Of course, there are like some questions you have to ask, like checklists and stuff like that. But there is some subjectivity in it. It depends. Like for example, if I saw, I was an examiner in those exams, by the
Oh,
way.
nice.
I was an examiner, and if I see a performance and I have a scale from 1 to 10, I might rate that person, for example, 10, because like I saw like he did everything and things were good. But someone else might rate them at 7 because that person might be super perfectionist, and
Right.
for them they will never give anyone beyond like more than 8.
Mm.
And for me, I'm okay to give. So there is lots of subjectivity and which you can't catch, and that's where AI comes for standardization. So I completely agree with you.
And if I could just add,
Yeah.
you also don't have much control over the patient you see. And that's
Yes,
because that patient is very expensive. You have to train a whole new cohort of
I agree.
actors every time you want to deploy a new vignette. And then you have to, they're billed hourly. They have to do a good job. Some of them don't do a good job. They follow strict scripts a lot of the time.
Hmm.
But with AI, like you said, you can do it while you're walking. You can do it, in the middle of the night. It's completely scalable and asynchronous. So instead of doing one patient interaction, maybe you can do 10 and 20. And that will be a much better judge of sort of how well you're going to do in real life.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Talking about again, I can comment on this because like I was involved and I see those
Hmm.
standardized patients. They cost like around per day. I remember the average cost like per day was 250 per patient or something like that because
That's
like you have to
crazy.
be there,
Wow.
and then like you have to train them, and if someone is sick and then like the entire test is ruined and then you have the
Hmm.
backup people, it's like it's a headache. So I agree with you. I agree with you on you're getting me you're bringing some flashbacks from the past days when I was an examiner. What advice would you wish someone gave you before starting all this?
I mean, I think, I'm not the right person to give advice. I definitely have seen how much I was wrong about in the past, and I'm sure I'm wrong about a lot now. And it's also a really hard question because I feel like yesterday's mistakes were sort of today's answers. Like you learn from that. I really think the only thing would say is just if you can do more, because, even if you do something and it ends up not being right, you end up making a mistake. The important thing is to learn from that, obviously. And so I think that the highest output decisions are just when you do more things that are out of the ordinary and spend less time sort of competing in the same ways everybody else is. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. It's just like that reminds me of a book I read, Blue Ocean. It's a book
Right.
that talks about competition, and in this book, the writer talks about how billion-dollar companies today were able to succeed in a very competitive market, which is like the red oceans, where everyone kill everyone and
Mm.
the water turns into blood. But when someone is able to figure out like a competitive moat around them, to turn it into a blue ocean, and I completely agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. And like one specific thing for me is I spent a lot of time when I was in high school doing this speech and debate. And I was really into it. I spent a lot of time and energy. But so were lots of other people my age that were spending very competitive, very smart guys that were doing that. And I spent a much less amount of time working on startups. But when I look back, it was the time I spent working on startups, which is something no one else was doing, that had the highest return on investment in terms of what I learned and sort of what I was able to talk about.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. All right, awesome, great. Thank you so much, Tikran. I really appreciate you being with us here today, and I really appreciate your time. It was great having you.
Thank you, Rupen John. It was great being here.